Despite its religious veneer, Islam can easily be defined and understood by one non-religious word: tribalism. This is key. The entire appeal of Muhammad's call to the Arabs of his time lay in its perfect compatibility with their tribal mores, three in particular: loyalty to one's tribe, enmity for other tribes, and raids on the latter to enrich and empower the former. By the way, I understand some of you don't believe Muhammad ever existed. I'll definitely be addressing that down the line, but for now, bear with me and humor me, if only because what Muslims believe is much more important than what actually happened, but which can't be proven one way or another. More anon. Anyway, for 7th century Arabs, and later tribal and pastoral peoples such as the Turks and Tatars, or Mongols, who also found natural appeal in and converted to Islam, the tribe was what humanity is to modern people. To be part of the tribe was to be treated humanely. To be outside the tribe was to be treated inhumanely. Period. This may be hard for modern people living in the West to understand, but try. Muhammad reinforced this ancient dichotomy of tribalism, but by prioritizing religion over relatives. Thus, in his Constitution of Medina, which he promulgated with various non-Muslim tribes in 622, he asserted that, quote, "A believer shall not slay a believer for the sake of an unbeliever, nor shall he aid an unbeliever against a believer. Moreover, all Muslims were to become, quote, friends one to the other, to the exclusion of outsiders," unquote. Hence the Ummah, which is often translated as Muslim nation, was born. Etymologically connected to the word mother, the Ummah came to signify the Islamic supertribe, a sort of universal tribe that transcends racial, national, and linguistic barriers, encompassing any and all who identify as Muslims. And its natural enemies remained everyone outside of it. Again, this is basic tribalism 1.0, though as mentioned with a religious covering or veneer. Or consider the Islamic doctrine of al-wala wal-bara, which I talk about often, which is translated as loyalty and enmity or love and hate. Muhammad preached it, and the Quran commands it. Taken together, for example, Quran 58:22 and 64 call on all Muslims to renounce and disown their non-Muslim relatives, quote, even if they be their fathers, their sons, their brothers, or their nearest kindred, end quote, and to feel only enmity and hatred for them until they believe in Allah alone, that is, until they become Muslim. Check out those verses sometime, assuming your English Quran translation is an honest one. Anyway, those two verses, Quran 58:22 and 64, are referring to a number of Muhammad's close companions who, according to Islamic history, renounced and eventually slaughtered their own non-Muslim relatives as a show of their loyalty to Allah, Muhammad, and the believers. One slew his father, another his brother, a third, Abu Bakr, the first righteous caliph, tried to slay his own son, and Omar, the second righteous caliph, slaughtered several of his relatives. For more on al-wala wal-bara, see my 60-page translation of Dr. Ayman al-Zawahri's treatise on this doctrine in my 2007 book, The Al-Qaeda Reader. At any rate, from here we come to the natural origin of jihad. Tribalistic blood ties were exchanged for religious ones, thereby dividing the world into two mega-tribes, the believers in one tent and their natural enemies, the non-believers or infidels, in another. And as we've seen, the essence of tribalism is warring and preying on other tribes in order to empower your own. This dichotomized worldview is actually enshrined in Islamic law or Sharia's mandate that Dar al-Islam, the abode of Islam, or the world of Islam, must battle Dar al-Kufr, the abode of non-Islam, in perpetuity until the former subjugates the latter. In, for example, the Encyclopedia of Islam, we read under the entry for jihad that, quote, the spread of Islam by arms is a religious duty upon Muslims in general. Jihad must continue to be done until the whole world is under the rule of Islam. Islam must completely be made over before the doctrine of jihad can be eliminated. In other words, the doctrine of jihad, warfare on the other, is so pivotal to Islam that without it, Islam ceases to be. Islam's apotheosis or deification of tribalism also explains why tribal societies other than the Arabs also gravitated to and found Islam appealing. Consider the Turkic people's oldest epic, the Book of Dedi Korkut. Although newly converted to Islam, the Turks of this epic regularly engage in pagan practices banned by Islam. They eat horse meat, drink wine and other fermented drinks, and their women are, in comparison to Muslim women, relatively free and independent. It's only in the context of raids on the infidel, a smooth and easy transition from raids on the tribal outsider, that Islam finally becomes evident in their lives. Here, for example, is a typical pre-battle boast from the Turks of the epic. I shall raid the bloody infidel's land. I shall cut off heads and spill blood. I shall make the infidel vomit blood. I shall bring back slaves and slave girls. Here is another typical account of these new Turkish converts' pious exploits. Quote, they, the early Turkic converts, destroyed the infidel's church. They killed its priests and made a mosque in its place. They had the call to prayer proclaimed. They had the invocation or the shahada recited in the name of Allah Almighty. The best of the hunting birds, the purest of stuffs, the loveliest of girls they selected. Aside from preying on the infidel other, which already came natural to the pre-Islamic Turks, any and all non-violent aspects of Islam, fasting, zakat, pilgrimage, are totally absent from the lives of these earliest Turkic converts, as portrayed in the Book of Dedi Korkut. Even so, the older Muslim peoples, the Arabs and Persians, praise the new converts simply because they fight in the way of Allah, waging jihad against the infidels, to quote from several sources. Being committed to the jihad has always gone a long way to exonerate otherwise un-Islamic behavior among Muslims, as if one group of Muslims is saying, well, at least they're doing the hard part, war on infidels, so let's give them a break. It was the same for those Mongols who embraced Islam, the Tatars. As the Dominican friar Ricoldo, who died in 1320 and who spent about a decade in the Muslim world, once observed, Tatars had adopted Islam because it was the easy religion, as Christianity was the hard one. In other words, whereas Islam complemented their pre-existing tribal way of living, including by giving them license to prey on all outsiders, Christianity only challenged it. So it is that Muhammad's most enduring contribution to world history is that in repackaging the tribal mores of 7th century Arabia through a theological paradigm, he also deified tribalism into a sort of hyper-tribalism, causing it to outlive its historic setting and dramatically spill into the modern era. Hence the notorious resistance to assimilation in the West, the creation of enclaves and clannish no-go zones in Europe, and the constant flare-outs of hate crimes and terrorism. Whereas many world civilizations have been able to break away from, or at least temper, their historic tribalism, this has not been and cannot be so easy for Islam. For Muslims to break away from tribalism is for them to break away from Allah's laws. Laws which, as seen, are logical and gratifying, at least from a primordial, or if you like, primitive point of view.